She was 8 months pregnant. She trusted him with her life. And in one night, everything she believed about her husband turned out to be a lie she'd been living inside for years. If you've ever loved someone who made you question everything, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one doesn't let go. The rain came in sideways off the coast, the kind that didn't fall so much as a tack, sheets of it hammering the windows of Adrian Callahan's estate, rattling the old iron gates at the foot of the drive, pooling in the low corners of the courtyard where the stone had settled and cracked over decades of weight. The kind of night that made people stay inside, stay quiet, stay close to whatever warmth they had left. Mara Callahan was 22 minutes from the estate when the first contraction hit. It wasn't the real thing. She knew that. Her doctor had been telling her for 3 weeks that her body was rehearsing, running through the motions, and she'd learned to read the difference between a practice run and something she needed to act on. This one she breathed through, both hands flat on the steering wheel, eyes forward, the wipers slapping back and forth in front of her while the GPS recalculated around a flooding underpass on Route 7. She'd been at her friend Nina's place for dinner. Nina, who asked too many questions and talked too loud and made Mara feel, for a few hours, like a normal woman expecting a normal baby with a normal life waiting at home. She wasn't normal. She'd stopped being normal the day she married Adrian Callahan. The estate came into view through the rain, its silhouette black and massive against the sky, the iron fence lit at intervals by security lights that bled orange into the wet air. Mara punched in the gate code from memory. The gate swung. She pulled through. She almost didn't notice the second car parked near the side entrance. A dark coupe she didn't recognize, no plates visible from her angle. She filed it. Her mind was still working through the contraction, the rain, the 17 things she needed to do before the baby came. Adrian probably had a guest. He always had guests. Business people, lawyers, the men with careful eyes who sat across his desk and spoke in low voices about things Mara had learned not to ask about. She let herself in through the kitchen entrance. The house was quiet in the way that meant the staff had been sent home or told to stay out of a particular wing. She'd learned that quiet too. It had its own texture. She set her keys on the counter, pressed one hand against the small of her back where the ache had been living for 2 weeks. She was wearing her coat still, damp at the shoulders, and she was thinking about tea and the couch in the sitting room off the main hall, which faced the fireplace and had the best light for reading, when she heard the voices. They were coming from Adrian's study. The door was cracked, not open, just cracked, the way it sometimes was when he was in the middle of something he didn't want completely sealed off from the rest of the house. A habit she'd noticed early in their marriage and never fully understood. She heard a woman's voice first, low, close, urgent, then Adrian's, quieter. And something in his tone, not the voice he used in meetings, not the voice he used with her, something she didn't have a word for yet, but that her body understood before her mind did, because she was already moving down the hall before she'd made a conscious decision to move. The door opened under her hand without a sound. Adrian was standing near the window, his back half turned to the door, his hand on the arm of a woman Mara had never seen before. Not on her shoulder, not a handshake. His hand on her arm the way you hold someone when you're keeping them from falling, or when you're the reason they might. The woman was dark-haired, tall, her face tilted up toward his, her free hand pressed flat against his chest. They heard the door. Both of them turned. For a moment, none of the three of them said anything at all. Mara looked at Adrian. She looked at his hand still on the woman's arm. She looked at the woman's hand still on his chest. Mara. His voice came out wrong. Too fast and then too slow. She didn't answer. She was looking at his face. 8 months of pregnancy had made her hyper-attuned to faces, to the micro-expressions that passed across people's features in the fraction of a second before they composed themselves. And what she saw in Adrian's face in that first instant was not guilt exactly, but something close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. There was fear in it. And fear, in a man like Adrian Callahan, didn't come from nowhere. "It's not what you think," he said. Mara had always hated that sentence. She'd heard it enough times in enough contexts that it had lost any meaning it might once have had. It was what people said when it was exactly what you thought. "I'm going to go," the woman said quietly, stepping back. "You're not going anywhere," Adrian said, and his voice had shifted, not to Mara now, to the woman. Hard and flat and final. Mara turned and walked back down the hall. She heard him call her name. She heard his footsteps behind her. She kept walking. Through the kitchen. Her keys were on the counter where she'd left them. She picked them up. Mara, stop. Please. She stopped. She did not turn around. That woman. I need you to let me explain. There's something happening, something I've been trying to protect you from. She turned then. She turned because she wanted to see his face when he said it. She needed to see if he believed it himself, or if he was just doing what he did, constructing the story that served the moment, filling the space between them with words that were technically true and structurally false. His face was tight. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. There were shadows under his eyes she hadn't noticed when she'd left that morning, which meant he'd been awake all night last night, and probably the night before. He was standing in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, and he looked, for the first time in the 3 years she'd known him, like a man who was genuinely afraid he was about to lose something he couldn't get back. It didn't matter. Or it mattered, and she couldn't hold it. Because the image of his hand on that woman's arm was already doing what images like that do. It was rewriting everything behind it, reaching back through memory, and changing the color of things she thought she understood. I'm tired, Mara said. Her voice was steady in the way that meant she was holding it with both hands. I'm tired, and I'm wet, and I'm 8 months pregnant, and I need you to move. Mara, move, Adrian. He moved. She walked out to her car. She drove. She didn't know where she was going until she was already going there. She'd met Adrian Callahan 3 years ago at a fundraiser for a children's hospital she'd been covering for a local magazine, a piece on wealthy donors and the optics of generosity. She'd been doing freelance work after leaving her staff job, building her byline, learning to spot the difference between people who gave because they needed to and people who gave because they needed to be seen giving. Adrian Callahan fell into a third category she hadn't encountered before. He gave in a way that suggested he understood the transaction, but didn't particularly care about either side of it. He wrote the check. He shook the hands. He watched the room with the calm, steady attention of a man who was always doing 2 things at once and never looked hurried doing either. She'd approached him for a quote. He'd given her one, careful, correct, useless for her piece. She'd thanked him and turned to leave, and he'd said, "You don't believe a word I just said." She'd stopped. She'd turned back. "No," she said, "but it'll print fine." He'd laughed. It wasn't a polished laugh. It was shorter and rougher than she expected from a man in a tuxedo at a charity event, and it surprised her enough that she'd stayed for another 20 minutes talking to him about things that had nothing to do with her article, and by the time she left, she'd given him her number without entirely deciding to. She'd known what he was before the second date, not the specifics. Those came later, and they came in pieces. But the shape of it, the security detail that materialized in public and dissolved into the background without instruction, the way certain conversations ended when she entered a room, the men who deferred to him in the specific way that wasn't professional courtesy, but something older and more physical, the deference of people who had reasons to defer that went beyond a title or a paycheck. She told herself she was a journalist. She told herself she could handle complexity. She told herself that the man who called her at midnight to read her the last paragraph of a book he'd just finished and ask what she thought of the ending was a real person and not a construct, and that the other thing, the organization, the weight of it, the part she didn't let herself think about too long, was context, not character. She'd been lying to herself. She knew that now. She'd known it for a while, but she'd loved him anyway. That was the part she couldn't get around. She'd loved him in the specific, inconvenient way that doesn't respond to reason, that persists after you've cataloged every reason it shouldn't. She'd loved the way he listened. The full-body attention of a man who never pretended to be interested in something he wasn't. She'd loved the way he looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a room full of smoke. She'd loved the 2 weeks they spent in a rented house on the coast after she lost the first pregnancy, when he hadn't tried to fix it or fill the silence, just sat with her while the loss moved through her and then moved through both of them. She pressed her hand to her belly now. The baby shifted. She pulled into the parking lot of an all-night pharmacy, engine running, rain on the roof. She sat there for a while. She didn't cry. She was past the immediate place where crying lives, already into the colder territory beyond it. Her phone had 6 missed calls from Adrian, then a 7th, then silence. She thought about calling him back. She thought about what he'd say and what she'd believe, and what believing it or not believing it would actually change about the image that was still running on a loop behind her eyes. She didn't call back. She went to Nina's. Nina opened the door at midnight without asking questions, which was the thing Mara loved most about her. Made tea, put a blanket on the couch, said, "You can tell me whenever," and meant it, and didn't push when the answer turned out to be not tonight. Mara lay on her back on Nina's couch with her hands on her belly and stared at the ceiling and ran through the options the way she did when she was working, methodically, without sentiment. She was good at that. It was the part of herself she trusted most. She could go back. She could hear him out. She could evaluate the explanation on its merits and decide from there. That was the rational path, and she was aware of it. She could wait. She could give herself a night and him a night and see what the morning looked like. Also rational. Or she could do what every instinct she had was telling her to do, what the image of his hand on that woman's arm and the sound of his voice saying her name in that particular wrong way was driving her toward. She could leave. Not for the night, not for the week. She could leave in the real sense of the word, the way that doesn't come back. She was not naive about what that meant. She knew who Adrian Callahan was. She knew what it meant to be his wife and what it might mean to be his former wife, especially carrying his child. She'd read enough about the world he operated in to know that exit strategies in marriages like hers were rarely clean. But she was also a journalist. She knew how to build a new life in a new place with a new name. She knew how paper trails worked and how to cut them. She knew people, carefully selected, carefully trusted, who could help. She made a decision lying there on Nina's couch. It was the kind of decision that felt completely clear in the moment and would cost her everything to follow through on. Wow. She spent 2 weeks moving pieces without making noise. She did it while Adrian was trying to reach her through intermediaries, through lawyers, through a handwritten letter that Nina intercepted and left unopened on Mara's request. She did it while her body continued its preparations. The weight, the pressure, the increasing frequency of her practice contractions, her body running its own parallel agenda. She had money in an account Adrian didn't know about. Not a lot. She'd been careful not to be obvious about it, but enough. She had an arrangement with a woman she'd known since college who ran a small property management business in a mid-sized city 3 states away. A woman who owed her a favor she'd never collected and who asked only one question when Mara finally called. "Do you need to disappear or just relocate?" "Disappear," Mara said. "Okay." On a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the night in the rain, Mara wrote Adrian a letter. She sat at Nina's kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow, and she wrote it by hand, because some things need to be written by hand, because the act of forming each word yourself with your own body means you can't outrun what you're saying while you're saying it. She didn't write about the woman. She didn't write about the study, or the hand or his face in the moment he turned. She wrote about everything that had led to that moment. The years of half-truths she'd accepted because she loved him, the information she'd let herself not pursue because pursuing it meant confronting what she already suspected, the slow erosion of the version of herself she'd been before she became part of his world. She wrote about their child, the one she was carrying, the one who was already a person with a heartbeat and preferences and a foot that pressed insistently against her right side. And she wrote that she was not going to raise that child in the shadow of a life she didn't fully understand and couldn't fully trust. She wrote that she was not angry. She wrote that she was something colder and more final than angry. She wrote that she hoped he was capable of understanding the difference. She put the letter in an envelope. She put her wedding ring in the envelope. She sealed it. She left it on Nina's kitchen table with a note on top for Nina. Give this to his lawyer, not to him directly. She'd make sure Nina had the lawyer's name. She didn't trust that Adrian wouldn't find a way to get to Mara through Nina if Nina contacted him directly, and she wasn't ready to have a conversation she hadn't finished preparing for. She left Nina's apartment at 6 in the morning with 2 bags and her laptop, and the cold certainty of a person who has made a decision they know they'll live with for the rest of their lives, whether it was right or wrong. She delivered their son in a hospital in a city she's not going to name, in the middle of a night in October that was cold and clear and nothing like the rainy night she'd left. She named him Thomas, not a family name from either side. She'd specifically avoided family names, a clean name, a name that belonged only to itself. He was born at 3:17 in the morning, 7 pounds 4 ounces, a healthy and apparently opinionated child who registered his arrival with the kind of volume that made the nurses laugh. Mara lay back against the pillow afterward with him on her chest, his weight alien and right at the same time, and felt the specific exhaustion that lives on the other side of something enormous. Not the exhaustion that asks for sleep, but the kind that is somehow already full. She'd done it alone. She had the friend network in this city, carefully built over the previous weeks. She had her property contact and a midwife she trusted, and a pediatrician who'd been referred through a chain that kept Mara's name off any searchable database Adrian's people might access. She had a new name on her lease, not her birth name, not Callahan. Something plain and middle of the country and forgettable. She was safe. Thomas was safe. She told herself that enough times in those early weeks that it started to become something she could almost believe. Thomas was 11 weeks old the first time she thought she saw someone watching the apartment. She'd been doing a grocery run. The city had a small market 4 blocks from her place that she preferred to the larger chain because it was cash-friendly and the owner didn't make conversation. And on her way back, she'd noticed a man at the corner she didn't recognize. That alone meant nothing. Cities had corners and corners had strangers. But she was trained to notice things, and what she noticed about this man was the quality of his stillness. He wasn't waiting for a bus. He wasn't on his phone. He was standing with the specific practiced nonchalance of someone who had learned to look like he wasn't watching something. She went home through an alternate route. She didn't see him again that day, but she started running her counter-surveillance protocols. Small things, varying her routes, timing her movements, paying attention to vehicles that appeared more than once in different contexts. Journalist habits she'd learned from a source protection training years ago and had never expected to use this way. Thomas slept and woke and fed and slept in his bassinet beside her bed while she worked in the small hours, freelance editing work she'd picked up under her new name, just enough to keep money moving without raising flags. She was building again. It was slow and it was unglamorous, and sometimes it felt like building underwater, but it was happening. She called Nina once a week. Nina reported Adrian's people had been in contact in the first weeks. She'd given them nothing. The lawyer had received the letter, she'd confirmed that, and they'd eventually stopped reaching out to her directly. Adrian himself had not contacted Nina. That surprised Mara, and it also didn't surprise her because Adrian didn't waste moves. If he was coming, he wouldn't telegraph. Thomas had Adrian's eyes. She'd noticed it the first week and had decided not to feel anything about it, and that had worked about as well as those decisions usually do. 3 months in, Mara had a system, a life that fit inside its own frame, small enough to defend. She was sitting at her kitchen table on a Thursday evening, Thomas in the bouncer seat beside her, laptop open to a manuscript she was editing, when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She didn't answer unknown numbers. She let it go to the generic voicemail she'd set up under her cover name. No message. 2 minutes later, the same number. She answered it. A man's voice she didn't know. Ms. Callahan? Not her cover name, her real name. Her stomach went cold. I think you have the wrong... We need to talk about Thomas, the man said, before someone else does. She looked at Thomas and his bouncer. He was looking at the ceiling fan, which had become his current obsession. His small fists were opening and closing the way they did when he was content and thinking about nothing in particular. She said very carefully, Who are you? Someone who knows what's coming for you, the man said, and someone who knows it's not what you're expecting. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, Adrian doesn't know where you are, not yet, but the people he's been fighting for the last 4 months, they do. Mara's hand tightened on the phone. They found you because you were careful enough to hide from him, the man continued, and not careful enough to hide from them. Those aren't the same problem. Thomas made a small sound. A happy sound, probably. But Mara couldn't hear it right now. She was listening to the specific quality of silence on the other end of the line. Not dead silence, ambient silence, the kind that has air in it, that exists in a physical space. What do you want? She said. Nothing from you. I work for Adrian. He sent me to find you one. I found you 6 weeks ago. I've been sitting on it because my orders were to locate, not to contact. But something changed 3 days ago, and your location is no longer just in my file. She didn't respond. She was doing the math, and it wasn't coming out to anything she liked. You need to move, the man said. Tonight would be better than tomorrow. And go where? The pause on his end was not hesitation. It was the pause of someone who had anticipated the question and decided how much to give. Your husband is 20 minutes from your building, he said. He doesn't know yet that he's not the only one looking. I suggest you let him find you before the other option plays out. The call ended. Mara sat for exactly 4 seconds, her phone in her hand, the man's voice still occupying the air of her kitchen. Then she stood up and went to the window. The street below was wet from earlier rain. A car she hadn't seen before was parked 3 buildings down. Engine off, no visible occupant. She looked at it for a long moment and understood that she had run as far as she could run, that the careful life she'd built in this city was about to end one way or another, and that the choice in front of her was not about whether things fell apart, but about she didn't pack. There was no time to pack, and she knew it. Had known it from the second the call ended, from the second she'd looked down at that car on the street below, and understood that the careful architecture of the last 4 months had just become a liability instead of a shelter. She grabbed Thomas out of the bouncer with one hand and her go-bag from the closet shelf with the other. The go-bag had been ready since week 2. That was the journalist in her, or maybe the woman who had married Adrian Callahan and paid enough attention to understand what that meant. Cash, documents, a prepaid phone still in its packaging, a change of clothes for herself, and 3 days of supplies for Thomas. She'd packed it and told herself she was being paranoid. She was in the stairwell before the elevator finished its cycle. The building had a rear exit through the laundry room on the ground floor. She'd mapped it her first week, the way she'd mapped all the exits of every place she'd lived since leaving. The door pushed out onto a narrow service alley that ran between her building and the parking structure to the east. She'd never used it. She used it now. Thomas was awake and quiet against her chest, strapped into the carrier she'd grabbed off the hook by the door, his face pressed to her collarbone with the trusting heaviness of a child who does not yet know that the world contains threats. She moved through the alley with her bag over one shoulder and her hand on Thomas's back, counting her breathing the way she'd learned to do when things went sideways on a story. 4 in, hold, 4 out, keep moving. She was 3 steps from the alley's end when she saw him. He was leaning against the wall at the alley's mouth, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, not moving. Just there. Like he'd been there for a while. Adrian Callahan looked exactly as she remembered him, and nothing like she remembered him at the same time. He was thinner. The shadows under his eyes had graduated to something more permanent, carved in rather than painted on. His jaw was set in the way that meant he was holding something very tightly behind a controlled surface. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Too many things moving in it at once, a collision of things that hadn't yet sorted themselves into anything nameable. His eyes went to Thomas. She watched something happen in his face that she had no word for. "Mara," he said, very quiet. Not the voice he used when he was managing a situation. The other one, the one underneath. She stopped. She had no choice about stopping. He was in the way, and she wasn't going to run from him with Thomas in a carrier in an alley in the dark. But she held herself exactly where she was, one hand still on Thomas's back, the bag still on her shoulder, everything in her posture saying she had not made a decision about this yet. "You need to come with me," Adrian said. "That's not how this works." "I know." He pushed off the wall. She tensed, and he stopped. He read her correctly, which he always had. "I know it's not, but there are 2 men in a vehicle on the street in front of your building who are not my people, and there's a third one who was in your lobby 20 minutes ago asking your neighbor about the woman in 4C. Her stomach moved. "How long have you known where I was?" 6 weeks. "And you waited 6 weeks. I was trying to figure out the right way to do this." He said it without flinching, which meant he believed it, or had practiced believing it. "There isn't one." Thomas made a small sound, not distress, just presence, The involuntary audio of a baby reminding the adults around him that he existed. Adrian's eyes went to him again and stayed there for a second longer than they had to. Is he? He stopped himself. Yes, Mara said. His name is Thomas. Adrian breathed in through his nose, and through a slow, deliberate breath that she recognized as the thing he did when something hit him harder than he wanted to show. Okay, he said. His voice had changed slightly, compacted somehow. Okay, then we need to move. She almost said no. The word was right there, positioned, ready. She almost said no and walked back up the alley and called the number the man on the phone had given her, and tried to construct a third option out of the limited materials available. But there were two men in a vehicle in front of her building and a third one who knew her apartment number, and Thomas was 11 weeks old, and the math was the math. You drive, she said. I'll talk. His car was parked 2 blocks over, which meant he'd come on foot from somewhere and had been waiting. She processed that in the back seat with Thomas released from the carrier and held against her chest, the city sliding past the windows. Adrian driving with the controlled efficiency of someone who did not need GPS for this city, who knew it the way you only know a place you've spent years operating in. Talk, she said. He glanced at her in the mirror. The woman you saw, the night you left. Celeste Romano, she said. His eyes held hers in the mirror for a beat. You know her name. I know a lot of things. I'm a journalist, Adrian. I had 4 months. He returned his eyes to the road. What do you know? I know her father was Lorenzo Romano, who controlled a significant portion of the distribution infrastructure your organization used along the northeastern corridor until 2 years ago, when he died in what was reported as a boating accident. She let that settle. I know that after Lorenzo died, his assets and his debts didn't disappear. They transferred. I know that Celeste Romano has been meeting with at least 3 men who have known affiliations with the Vanex Syndicate, which is the organization that has been running a systematic campaign against your operation for the last 18 months. Adrian's hands on the wheel hadn't moved. What I don't know, Mara said, is which side she's on. Neither did I, he said. That's why she was in my study. The car turned. The city's lights changed. She came to me 3 weeks before you walked in, he said. Said she had information about a betrayal inside my organization. Said it came at a price. She wanted protection, relocation, a clean exit from her father's debts. She'd been using her father's old contacts to move in Vanex circles, feeding information back to her own network, trying to buy her way to safety. He paused. The night you walked in, I was in the middle of deciding whether she was telling the truth or whether she was the delivery mechanism for the betrayal she was claiming to expose. Mara looked at the back of his head, at the set of his shoulders. And, she said, she was telling the truth. He said it flatly. About the betrayal, about what she knew, but she was working more angles than she was showing me, and I didn't have all of it figured out yet when you walked through that door. So you let me leave. I didn't let you do anything. You made a decision and you executed it with a speed that told me you'd been ready to make it for a while. He glanced in the mirror again, which told me something I needed to know. She didn't answer that. I looked for you, he said. For the first 2 months, I pulled every resource I had. You were clean, better than I expected. I'm better than you expected at a lot of things. I know. No irony in it, just acknowledgement. Thomas had fallen asleep against her. She adjusted her hold on him. Who are the men in front of my building? She said. Vanex people. They're not there to observe. He said it without softening it, which she appreciated. They found you because they found a connection between you and a woman named Rachel Cho, who you used to buy your second set of documents. Rachel Cho has been under surveillance by Vanex Operation for unrelated reasons for the last 3 months. When your name surfaced in her file, they moved. The city outside had shifted. They were moving away from her neighborhood now, further from the center. Where are we going? She said. Somewhere safe, 12 hours, maybe less, and then we need to talk about what comes next. We're talking about what comes next right now. He took a breath. Fair. The safe house was a flat above a print shop in a commercial district, access through a rear stairwell, no visible security from the street, but she counted at least 3 positions as they came in. Men and one woman posted at intervals with the specific idleness of people who are very alert, Adrian's people. She didn't ask their names, and they didn't volunteer anything. The flat was small and clean, a kitchen, a main room with a couch and a table, 2 bedrooms. Someone had anticipated a baby. There was a collapsible crib in the corner of the main room that had been recently assembled, a small stack of supplies on the table beside it. She looked at it. She looked at Adrian. 6 weeks, she said again. He put his keys on the table. He sat down in the chair across from the couch, and he put his elbows on his knees and looked at her with the expression of a man who has stopped managing and is just being looked at. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm not going to explain myself in a way that's designed to make you come back. I need you to understand what's happening because it affects Thomas, and what affects Thomas I don't get to manage alone anymore." "You never got to manage alone," she said. "You chose to." He absorbed that. He didn't argue it, which meant it was true and he knew it. "The betrayal Celeste warned me about," he said. "It's not external. It's not Vanek operating from outside. Someone inside my organization, someone in the core structure, someone with access to operational logistics and financial routing, has been feeding information to Vanek for at least 2 years." Mara sat down on the couch. She laid Thomas in the crib and watched him sleep for a moment. Then she turned. 2 years, she said. "That covers our entire marriage." "Yes. So whatever they know about you, they know about me. About us." "They have known about you since before the wedding," he said. "I didn't know they knew. That's the part that—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "That's the part I can't get past." She studied him. "Who is it?" "I have 3 candidates. All 3 are people I've worked with for at least a decade. All 3 have the access required. I haven't been able to close the field further without tipping my hand, and tipping my hand means the informant disappears and takes the Vanek connection with them. And Celeste Romano was supposed to help you close the field. She had information about the financial routing, specific transfers that I could cross-reference against internal records. She'd seen enough of Vanek's operation from the inside to identify patterns that would narrow it." He paused. "She gave me enough to eliminate one of the 3 candidates. It leaves 2. "Who are the 2? He looked at her for a moment. "Mara. Don't protect me from this. You brought me into this building and you sat down across from me and you're asking me to make decisions about my son's safety. Tell me who the 2 are." He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Marcus Feld, my head of financial operations, and Daniel Reyes, who runs security and logistics." She knew both names. She'd met both men. Marcus Feld was 61, heavy-set, had been with Adrian since before the organization was the organization. He'd been there at the beginning, when Adrian was building it from pieces of something that used to belong to someone else. Daniel Reyes was younger, mid-40s, precise and quiet, the kind of man who furnished his house with furniture that had no personality because he spent his attention elsewhere. "If it's Marcus," she said slowly, "it's ideological or financial. He's been around long enough to have his own grievances. Or long enough to have been bought so long ago that it doesn't feel like being bought anymore. If it's Reyes, then everything I thought I knew about my own security infrastructure is a fiction," Adrian said, "which means Vanek has had better visibility into my operation than I knew, and the last 2 years of strategic decisions I've made have been made under observation." The weight of it settled into the room. Mara pressed her hands flat on her knees. "Your organization is collapsing," she said. It wasn't a question. "My organization is under strategic attack from an enemy who has had 2 years to prepare for it and the advantage of interior intelligence. It's not collapsing yet, but it will be if I don't close the breach. And closing the breach means identifying one of 2 men you've trusted for a decade. Yes. And you need Celeste Romano to do that." "I needed her. Past tense." He reached into his coat and put a phone on the table between them. "Celeste Romano was found dead 4 days ago. Her apartment. It was staged to look like a suicide. It wasn't." Mara looked at the phone. It was locked, but the screen had an evidence photo on it, a preview visible before unlock. She didn't reach for it. "They found out she was talking to you," she said, "which means whoever it is, Marcus or Reyes, they knew about Celeste before I fully understood what she was giving me, which means they're watching me more closely than I thought. He looked at Mara. And when Vonek's people showed up at your building tonight, it wasn't random. Someone told them where you were. She felt it go through her, the full implication of it. Someone inside your organization, she said, told Vonek where I was. Yes. Knowing I had a newborn. Yes. She looked at Thomas asleep in the crib, his chest rising and falling with the absolute indifference to danger that infancy allows. The tight fists, the faint sound of his breathing. She looked back at Adrian. This isn't about your empire anymore, she said. Very quiet, very still. No, he said. It hasn't been for a while. She stood up. She moved to the window and looked out at the commercial street below. Empty at this hour, the print shop's signage dark, a streetlight making a circle of orange on the wet pavement. She could see one of Adrian's security positions from here, a man in a dark jacket moving with deliberate casualness near the corner. I want to see everything Celeste gave you, she said. Mara, I'm not asking. She turned from the window. You brought me here. You told me there's a mole in your organization who just tried to have me and your newborn son located by a syndicate that doesn't make survivors. You have 2 suspects and no way to close the field. I am a person who investigates things for a living. She held his gaze. Let me work. He didn't answer immediately. She could see him running it. The risk calculation, the implications of bringing her inside. The version of himself that would have said absolutely not without consideration. If I let you into this, he said slowly, you're inside it. There's no halfway position. There was never a halfway position, she said. I just didn't know it yet. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached into his coat again and put a second item on the table, a folded envelope, thick with paper. This is what she gave me, he said. Financial routing records, meeting logs, partial organizational charts from Vanek's structure. He paused. And one more thing she told me the night before she died. She called me. She said she'd figured out which of the 2 it was. She was going to send me documentation to prove it. But she died before she could. She died before the documentation arrived, but she told me where she was going to pull it from. He looked at the envelope, then at Mara. It's in a safety deposit box registered under her mother's maiden name, bank on the east side of the city. I have the box number. I don't have the key. Mara looked at the envelope. Where's the key? She said. That's the problem. He met her eyes. Celeste told me she gave it to someone for safekeeping, someone she trusted, someone outside her world. He paused. She gave it to her sister, who hasn't spoken to Celeste in 7 years, doesn't know what it opens, and has no idea her sister is dead. The room was very quiet for a moment. Does Marcus Feld know about the safety deposit box? Mara said. I don't know. Does Reyes? I don't know. But whoever killed Celeste might have gotten that information from her before she died. Yes, Adrian said, which means if that information exists in that box, there may already be someone moving toward it. Mara picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands without opening it. You need to find the sister, she said. I know. And you need to do it before they do. I know. She set the envelope down. She looked at Thomas. She looked at Adrian. There's something else, she said. Something you haven't told me yet. I can see it. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has weight behind it. Marcus Feld attended a meeting 4 days ago, he said. A meeting I didn't sanction and didn't know about until I had it pulled from surveillance footage this morning. He met with a man named Gregor Vonek, not a proxy, not a representative. He let that land. Gregor Vanek himself. She felt the thing that had been building in the room for the last hour finally solidify into something with a specific shape. Then it's not a question anymore, she said. It's Marcus. The meeting suggests it. It doesn't prove it. And if I move on Marcus without proof, if I'm wrong, or if Reyes is running a parallel operation and used Marcus as a decoy, I burn the only move I have left. His voice had gone flat in the way it did when he was carrying something too heavy to put down. And if I wait, if I take the time to get proof, they move first, she said. They're already moving. Celeste is dead. Your location was burned. They're not building towards something. They're executing it. The rain, which had let up an hour ago, started again outside the window. Mara could hear it on the glass, on the roof of the print shop below. "Then we have no time," she said. "No," he said. "We don't." She opened the envelope. The financial routing records slid out onto the table, pages of them, columns of numbers that to most people would have been impenetrable, and to her were a language she'd been reading since her first investigative piece 7 years ago, when a source had walked her through the architecture of a money laundering operation, and she'd spent 3 weeks learning to see the patterns. She spread the pages out. She looked at them. She could hear Adrian across the table, his breathing, the specific tension in his stillness. She found the first anomaly in 4 minutes, a routing sequence that doubled back through 2 shell accounts before landing in a holding structure she didn't recognize. She put her finger on it. "This account," she said. "The endpoint here." "What is it?" Adrian leaned forward. He looked at where her finger was. Something moved in his face. "That's a routing structure we decommissioned 8 months ago," he said slowly, "after a security review. Reyes ran the security review." She looked up at him. He looked back at her. "If someone's still routing through a decommissioned structure," she said, "it means they kept access after the official shutdown. Which means they had a reason to keep access. Which means they knew what the review was going to find and moved ahead of it." His voice had gone very quiet. "Reyes ran that review." "You said Marcus met with Vanek." "He did." "Could that meeting have been set up? Could Reyes have arranged for Marcus to be at a meeting, made sure your surveillance caught it?" The silence that followed was the longest one yet. "If Reyes has been inside my security infrastructure for 2 years," Adrian said, "he knows every camera I have. He knows every surveillance protocol. He could have put Marcus in front of a camera without Marcus knowing why he was there." He paused. "He could have been building a frame. While the real operation runs through the decommissioned account he kept alive." Adrian stood up from the table. He turned away, one hand pressed to the back of his neck, and stood like that for a moment with his back to her. She watched his shoulders. "I trusted him," he said. Not to her specifically, just to the air. "I know. 15 years. I know." He turned back. His face had changed. Something had gone out of it, and something harder had come in to fill the space. She'd seen that look before, had seen what came after it, and she didn't look away from it now. "If it's Reyes," he said, "then he knows everything about this safe house. He helped design the security protocol for every location in my network. He said it with the flat precision of someone following a logic chain to its conclusion without allowing themselves to react to it yet. We can't stay here." Mara was already on her feet, already moving to the crib, already picking up Thomas with practiced efficiency, already reaching for the carrier. "How long do we have?" she said. "If he knows we're here, minutes. If he doesn't know yet." A sound from downstairs. Not a loud sound, the kind of small sound that a building makes when someone is trying not to make sound. Mara had Thomas against her chest and the go bag in her hand before Adrian finished his sentence, and the look he gave her across the table in that moment was not the look of a man managing a situation. It was the look of a man who had just understood, fully and without any remaining shelter of denial, that the person standing across from him was the only. The sound came again. Not the building settling, not pipes. The specific compression of a stair tread under controlled weight. Someone who knew how to move quietly and was moving quietly anyway, which meant they weren't building maintenance and they weren't lost. Adrian was already at the door of the flat before Mara had finished fastening the carrier. He held up 2 fingers without looking at her, 2 on the stairs. She didn't ask how he knew. She'd learned early in their marriage that he processed spatial information the way she processed text, automatically, in the background, without needing to think about it consciously. He looked at her, looked at Thomas. Something crossed his face that she didn't have time to read. "Back window," he said, very low. "Fire escape. 3rd landing, turn left. There's an access door into the print shop. Through the shop, out the loading bay, there's an alley that runs east. Follow it to the cross street and wait." "And you?" "I'll be right behind you." She'd heard that before in other contexts, and it had always been true, and she had no reason to believe it wasn't true now, except that the way he said it had the quality of a sentence that was doing two jobs at once. Adrian. Go. She went. The back window was painted shut, and she lost 4 seconds getting it open. Thomas pressed flat against her chest, the go bag catching on the frame before she got it through. The fire escape was wet from the rain, the metal cold under her hand, the grating uneven under her feet. She moved down it with one hand on the rail and one hand on Thomas's back, not fast enough, never fast enough. The city spread out below her in orange light and wet pavement. Behind her, inside the flat, she heard voices. Then something that wasn't voices. She kept moving. The third landing, left. The access door was unlocked, which meant Adrian had planned this exit or someone on his team had prepared it, and she pushed through into the back of the print shop. Dark, smelling of ink and solvent, large machines crouching in the shadows like animals. She moved through the space by memory and the thin light coming from a security sign above the loading bay door. Found the door, found the latch. The alley outside was empty and wet and ran east between 2 commercial buildings with their backs to each other. She went east. She went fast. She was at the cross street in 2 minutes. She stood at the mouth of the alley with Thomas asleep against her. Somehow still asleep, a mercy she didn't examine too closely. And she watched the street and waited. 3 minutes, 5. Her phone, the prepaid one from her go bag, buzzed. A number she didn't know. She answered. It's clean, Adrian said. What? Cross street. Half a block north. Black SUV. She found it. She got in. He was in the passenger seat. A man she didn't know was driving. One of his people, compact and quiet, eyes forward. Adrian's coat had a tear at the shoulder she hadn't seen before. There was something dark on the back of his left hand that she chose not to look at directly. 2 of Reyes's people, he said, before she asked. Not Von X. She absorbed that. He's already moving against you directly. He's been moving against me directly for 2 years. He's just stopped pretending he isn't. The SUV moved into traffic. No destination announced. The driver seemed to already know where he was going. Mara held Thomas. She looked out the window at the city sliding past and let herself, for exactly 30 seconds, feel the full weight of the night. The phone call, the alley, the fire escape, the print shop, the 5 minutes standing at a cross street not knowing if Adrian was coming, and then she put it somewhere internal and sealed it. She'd learned that from him, though she'd never told him so. The practice of feeling something fully and then deciding where to store it so you could function. Where are we going? She said. Marcus Feld's house. She turned to look at him. You said you didn't have proof it was Reyes. I have more now. One of the men upstairs was carrying a phone with a single outgoing call in the last 6 hours. The call was to a number registered to a logistics company Reyes controls through a third party. He said it without inflection. It's not courtroom proof. It's enough for me. Enough for you to do what? He looked at her. To go to Marcus. You said Marcus met with Vanek. I said surveillance footage showed Marcus at a location where Vanek was present. That's not the same sentence. He turned to look forward again. If Reyes has been running the security infrastructure and running the frame simultaneously, he could have put Marcus in that room without Marcus understanding why he was being invited. Reyes controls every camera in my network. He wrote the protocols, he knows what I watch, and when I watch it. Mara was quiet for a moment, running it. You're going to tell Marcus that Reyes set him up. I'm going to ask Marcus if he was set up. There's a difference. And if you're wrong, if Marcus is the one and you just walked into it, then tonight gets worse, Adrian said. But I've known Marcus Feld for 15 years, and I know what his face does when he's been caught in something, and I've never seen it do that. She didn't argue further. She didn't have enough information to argue further, and she knew it. She looked at Thomas instead, at the small, perfect unconscious face of her son who was sleeping through the complete disintegration of his parents' careful construction of safety, and she thought about what kind of world he was going to wake up into. Mom. Marcus Feld's house was in a residential neighborhood of wide streets and large trees, the kind of neighborhood where old money lived quietly because old money didn't need to announce itself. The lights were on in the front room, which meant Marcus was awake, which at this hour meant either insomnia or he'd been called. Adrian told the driver to wait. He and Mara went to the front door. Marcus answered it in 30 seconds, which was too fast. He was dressed not in the rumpled way of a man who'd just pulled something on, but in the composed way of a man who'd been waiting. He was 61 and looked it tonight, looked every year of it, his face arranged in the expression of a man who had been sitting with something heavy for long enough that the heaviness had become the expression. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Mara. He looked at the carrier and the sleeping child in it. He stepped back from the door without saying anything. They came in. The front room was the room of a man who had lived alone for 15 years, functional, without warmth, the furniture chosen for durability rather than comfort. Marcus sat in the chair by the window. Adrian and Mara stood. The dynamic was deliberate. "You know why I'm here," Adrian said. "I know you've been running a security audit for the last 6 weeks," Marcus said. His voice was steady. "I know 2 of Daniel's people turned up dead in a print shop on the east side an hour ago. And I know you wouldn't come here at this hour unless you'd made a decision you needed to test before you committed to it. Were you at a meeting with Gregor Von Eck 4 days ago?" Marcus looked at him directly. "I was at a dinner at a private club in the financial district. I was invited by a man named Silas Pruitt, who said he was representing a potential business partner looking for quiet investment opportunities. I went because Silas Pruitt has been a legitimate referral source for 6 years, and I had no reason to think the invitation was anything other than what it appeared to be." He paused. "I didn't know Vanek was going to be at that dinner until I was already seated." "And when you saw him?" "I stayed for 20 minutes, said nothing of substance, and left. I reported it to Daniel the following morning." Marcus's eyes hadn't moved from Adrian's. "Daniel told me to leave it with him, that he'd handled the notation in the security log." The room went very still. Mara felt it. The specific stillness that arrives when something that was theoretical becomes structural. "He told you he'd log it," Adrian said. "He told me he'd handle it." "There's no notation in the security log," Adrian said. "I pulled it this morning. The dinner doesn't exist in the record." Marcus absorbed this with the quality of a man who had suspected something and was now watching it confirmed in a shape that was worse than he'd imagined. He exhaled through his nose. His hands, folded in his lap, tightened briefly and then released. "How long?" Marcus said. "Quiet. Not asking about the meeting, asking about the larger thing." 2 years minimum, possibly more." Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. When he looked up, something in his face had gone hard in the way that older men go hard. Not the heat of it, just the cold, settled weight of a long betrayal understood all at once. "He was in my office last week," he said, "asking about contingency accounts. Told me he was updating the security protocols after the Celeste Romano situation." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the contingency structures were on a separate system. He said he needed the access parameters to complete the update. He stopped. He looked at Adrian with the expression of a man who has just understood the specific shape of his own mistake. "I gave them to him." The silence that followed had a texture. "He has access to the contingency accounts," Mara said. She said it to Adrian, not to Marcus. "How liquid are they?" Adrian said. He was looking at Marcus, not at Mara. 40 to 60 million, depending on current positions. Marcus said it flatly, like a number that had stopped meaning anything in the last 90 seconds. "He could move it in under an hour if he had the right clearances." "He has the right clearances," Adrian said. Marcus stood up. He did it slowly, the way people stand up when they're carrying something. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to not use any communication device that has passed through Daniel Reyes' hands. I need you to go somewhere he doesn't know about and stay there until I contact you through a channel I'm going to give you right now." Adrian reached into his pocket. He put a card on the side table next to Marcus's chair. Just a number, handwritten. "And I need to know if Celeste Romano ever contacted you directly." Marcus looked at the card, then at Adrian. "She called me once, about 3 months ago. She said she had documentation about a financial irregularity she needed a trustworthy party to evaluate. I told her to contact you." "Did she say what kind of irregularity?" "She said it involved a routing structure that had been officially closed but was showing active movement. She had figures." He paused. "I assumed she'd come to you. I didn't follow up." "She came to me," Adrian said, "and then she died." Marcus's face didn't change much, but something behind it did. He reached for the card on the side table. Go, Adrian said. Now, don't pack. Don't call anyone. Marcus went. They heard the back of the house open and close. In the SUV, moving again, Mara said, Reyes is going to move the accounts tonight. I know. Can you stop him? Not through normal channels. He is the normal channels. Adrian's voice had the flatness of someone who had run out of the energy required for anything other than pure function. There's one move. The safety deposit box. If Celeste's documentation shows what I think it shows, a direct financial connection between the routing structure and Reyes, I can use it to freeze the accounts through an external mechanism, a legal hold. I have a lawyer who can do it if the documentation is solid. The box requires the key. The key is with Celeste's sister. You have her address? I have a last known. Mara looked at him. Then that's where we're going. Mara, it's 2 a.m. and this woman doesn't know her sister is dead yet. I know what time it is. She looked forward. Drive. What? The sister's name was Yael Romano, and she lived in a walk-up apartment in a neighborhood of narrow streets and close buildings. The kind of place that absorbed people who needed to be absorbed by a city, who needed the anonymity of density. The building's buzzer panel had 30 names on it in faded print. Adrian buzzed the apartment. Nothing. He buzzed again, a voice thick with sleep and irritation. Who is it? My name is Adrian Callahan. I was a colleague of your sister's. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. A long silence. Celeste doesn't have colleagues, the voice said. She did, and I need to tell you something about her that can't wait until morning. Another silence. Then the door buzzed open. Yael Romano was 34, slight, dark-haired in the way Celeste had been dark-haired. The resemblance was immediate and uncomfortable. She was in a robe, hair down, and she looked at them both with the guarded assessment of a woman who had learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors and was calibrating how much to open the door based on what she saw. She saw Adrian, and whatever calculation she was running shifted. She saw Mara and the baby and shifted again. She opened the door the rest of the way. They sat in her kitchen. She made coffee on automatic, the way people make coffee when they need something to do with their hands while they wait for the thing they already know is coming. She put mugs on the table and sat down across from them and looked at Adrian. Tell me, she said. He told her. He told her cleanly and without managing it. The way Celeste had died, what the police report said, what the police report didn't say. He told her Celeste had been trying to do something that took more courage than most people had, and that it had cost her. Yael didn't cry. She sat with it. Her hands were flat on the table. She breathed. She was quiet for a long time. We didn't speak, she said finally. For 7 years. She went into our father's business, and I went in the other direction, and we ran out of road between those two choices. She looked at her coffee. I thought there would be more time. I'm sorry, Mara said. She said it because it was true, not because it was useful. Yael looked at her, then at Thomas, asleep in the carrier. Something moved in her face. She called me, Yael said, about 2 weeks ago. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. A pause. She said she was trying to fix something. She said she was leaving something with me for safekeeping. She said I wouldn't know what it was, and I didn't need to know. I just needed to not lose it. She looked at Adrian. A key arrived in the mail 3 days later. I put it in my kitchen drawer because I didn't know what else to do with it. She got up. She went to the kitchen drawer. She came back with a small key on a plain ring. She held it out. Adrian reached for it. Yael pulled it back an inch. Not dramatically, just enough. What's in the box? She said. Proof that a man who murdered your sister has been running a criminal operation inside a larger organization for 2 years, Adrian said, and enough financial evidence to stop him from taking everything he's built and disappearing before morning. Yael looked at the key. She looked at him. She put the key in his hand. The bank opened at 8 in the morning. It was currently 3:47. They had 4 hours and 13 minutes. Adrian used the time to work the phones, not his regular phone, a clean one his driver produced, cycling through contacts Mara didn't know by name, speaking in clipped sentences that gave nothing to any individual listener. She watched him operate and felt the specific recognition she'd always felt watching him work. The efficiency of it, the total absence of wasted motion. He was not a good man in any simple sense of that word, but he was competent in the way that competence becomes its own form of integrity, and right now, that was what they had to work with. Thomas woke at 4 and needed feeding. Mara sat in the back of the SUV with the world running its parallel emergency outside the windows and fed her son in the specific quiet that exists inside an immediate crisis, when someone small and oblivious requires you to be still. She looked at Thomas's face. He looked back at her with the unfocused, profound attention of an infant who is doing the most important thing he knows how to do. She thought about Yael Romano sitting in her kitchen with a mug of coffee going cold, and 7 years of silence she would spend the rest of her life wishing she could give back. She thought about what she was doing and what she was doing it inside of, and whether there was any version of this story where Thomas got the life she'd tried to build for him in that anonymous apartment 3 states from here. The life with the grocery market, and the cash, and the neighbor who didn't ask questions. She thought probably not. At 6:15, Adrian's phone rang. He answered, listened for 40 seconds, and ended the call. He turned to look at Mara from the front seat. "Reyes moved," he said. She felt her stomach drop. "The accounts." He initiated a transfer at 5:52. "My lawyer filed an emergency legal hold at 6:08 based on the documentation I sent from what Celeste had given me verbally. Not enough to stop it on its own, but enough to flag it. The bank's fraud monitoring caught the flag and froze the transfer pending review." He paused. "It bought us time. Not much." "How much?" "The review window is 4 hours before they release the hold and the transfer completes. We need to be out of that bank with the documentation before then. The bank opens in 90 minutes. "I know. And Reyes?" "When the transfer froze, he would have received an alert." Adrian looked at her steadily. "He knows we're moving. He knows where we're moving." She looked back at him. "He'll be at the bank. Or his people will." He said it without looking away from her. "I need you to stay with Thomas and let me—" "Don't finish that sentence," she said. He didn't finish it. The driver, who had not spoken in 3 hours, said quietly, 20 minutes to the bank district. If we're going, we should go." Adrian faced forward. "Go." Das Raj. The bank was a limestone building on a corner, old-fashioned in its proportions, the kind of building designed to communicate permanence. It opened its doors at 8, and at 8:03 they were inside. In the marble-floored lobby, with its low light and its smell of recycled air and old money. The safety deposit vault was in the basement. A bank employee, young, efficient, visibly unnerved by the 2 people in front of her, who both looked like they hadn't slept, processed the box request from the registration Celeste had established under her mother's maiden name. Adrian provided the account verification Celeste had given him verbally the night before she died. The employee checked it twice. She led them down. The vault room was small and fluorescent and very quiet. The employee brought the box and left them alone with it, the way the protocol required. Adrian put the key in. The lock turned. He opened the box. Inside, a small external hard drive, a folded piece of paper, and an envelope sealed with tape, with a single word written on the front in neat handwriting. The word was Adrian. He looked at it for a moment. He picked up the hard drive first, handed it to Mara. "Whatever's on here, that's the financial records, routing documentation. It'll close the case against Reyes." She took it, put it in her bag. He picked up the folded paper, opened it, read it. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something shifted and settled and went quiet. He handed her the paper without speaking. It was a list of names, 15 of them. Next to each name, a date and a figure. Mara read down the list and understood within 4 names what she was looking at. These were payments, not to Reyes, not in Reyes' name. These were payments that had originated from a structure associated with Von Eck's organization and landed in accounts belonging to, she read the names again, belonging to people she recognized. 2 city officials, a federal contractor, a lawyer whose name she'd seen in connection with 3 major regulatory proceedings over the past decade. "This isn't just about Reyes," she said. "No," Adrian said. He was still looking at the box. "This is a network. Vanek has been building an infrastructure. Reyes was one piece of it. These people," she looked at the list. "These people were other pieces." "Celeste had been mapping it for 2 years," he said. "She didn't just stumble into information about Reyes. She was systematically documenting the whole structure. She knew what she had. She knew what it was worth and what it would cost her." He said it with the quality of someone reassessing something they thought they understood. "She gave me the piece I needed to move on Reyes because that was the piece I had leverage to act on. But she was holding the larger picture." Mara looked at the list, at the names, at the dates and figures that represented years of corruption running through layers of legitimate infrastructure. She looked at Adrian. "If this comes out," she said slowly, "it doesn't just end Reyes. It exposes the entire network. Every name on this list. Yes, including the channels Vanek has been using. Yes, which means Vanek loses his entire operational infrastructure in this region in one move." Adrian picked up the sealed envelope with his name on it. He held it for a moment without opening it. "Celeste Romano was building a bomb," he said. "She was just waiting for someone to aim it." He opened the envelope. The letter inside was 3 pages, handwritten, dense. Mara watched his face as he read it. She watched him get to the second page and stop. She watched something happen in his expression that she had only seen once before. At the hospital after the first pregnancy, the loss that they'd never found the right words for. That same particular quality of pain. He looked up from the letter. "What?" she said. He handed her the letter without speaking. She read. She got to the middle of the second page and felt the ground shift under everything. Celeste Romano Sawash had not stumbled into her father's network after his death. Lorenzo Romano had not died in a boating accident. Lorenzo Romano had been killed deliberately, precisely, by an order that had originated inside Adrian's organization. Not from Reyes, not from Marcus, from a decision made 3 years ago at the highest level of the Callahan organization to remove a logistical partner who had become a liability. The order had Adrian's authorization code on it. Mara looked up from the page. She looked at Adrian across the small fluorescent room. "Tell me you didn't know," she said. Very quiet. He held her gaze. His face was doing the thing it did when he was not managing, when he was just there, exposed without the controlled surface. "I authorized the removal of a liability," he said. "I was told it would be handled as a forced retirement, a buyout, and a disappearance. I signed off on the code and I trusted the execution to Reyes," she said. "Yes." She put the letter on the table. She took a breath. Celeste spent 2 years inside Vanek's network because she was looking for the person who ordered her father's death, Mara said. She found evidence of Reyes. She thought Reyes had acted unilaterally. She came to you because she thought you were the victim of a rogue operator. She looked at him. "She didn't know your code was on the order." "The code was on the order," he said. "I didn't issue that specific order. Reyes used my authorization code. He's done it before. It's how he built the frame on Marcus. He has access to my authentication systems." He stopped. "But I can't prove that from inside this room, and Celeste died believing her father was murdered on my instruction, and she came to me anyway because she needed me to stop Reyes, and she was willing to use me, even if she thought I was responsible, because stopping Reyes was more important to her than anything else, including her own." He stopped talking. The room was very quiet. Mara looked at the letter. She looked at the hard drive in her bag. She looked at the list of names. She looked at Adrian Callahan standing in a vault room in a limestone bank at 8:20 in the morning, a man who had spent 15 years building an empire on the premise that control was protection, that knowing everything was safety, that if he held the structure tightly enough, nothing inside it could break. She looked at her son in the carrier on her chest. "The hard drive," she said, "and the list. Can your lawyer use them?" "Yes." "To freeze Reyes, to expose the network, to end this." "Yes, if we get them out of this building." She looked at him steadily. "Then that's what we do first. Everything else, your code, the order, Celeste's father. We deal with that after. Mara. After. She said it with the finality of someone who has made a decision not because it feels right, but because it's the only one available. Can you get us out of this building? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it. His expression changed. Reyes is outside, he said. How many people? 4. Maybe more. He looked at the vault door. He knows about the box. He got here faster than I expected, which means he had someone in the bank. She looked at the single door in and out of the vault room. She looked at the box on the table, now empty. She looked at the hard drive in her bag and the list folded in her hand. Then we don't go out the front, she said. There's no other exit from this room. She looked at him, at the phone in his hand, at the door. Call Marcus, she said. Marcus is in a safe location. Call Marcus and tell him to call the federal contractor on that list. She held up the paper. The one whose name is third from the bottom. Tell Marcus to read him the figure next to his name, and tell him the hard drive exists and will be in federal hands within the hour unless he picks up his phone and calls the bank manager and tells him to initiate the emergency security lockdown protocol. She watched Adrian process it. A bank on lockdown can't be entered or exited by anyone, including Reyes, without federal authorization, which buys us time for your lawyer to get here with a legal team and take possession of the drive officially. Adrian looked at the list, at the name third from the bottom. He'll run, Adrian said. The moment he knows the drive exists, he'll freeze, Mara said, because the alternative to freezing is federal prosecution, and he knows it. Men like that don't run, they negotiate. And the only thing he can negotiate with right now is the 15 seconds it takes him to make one phone call. Adrian looked at her for a moment. It was a long moment. Then he called Marcus. She stood in the vault room with Thomas against her chest, and the hard drive in her bag, and the list in her hand, and listened to Adrian give instructions in the clipped, precise voice of a man executing a plan he hadn't built, and she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who has just realized something fundamental about the last 3 years of their life. That the woman standing in this room was not the woman who had walked into Adrian Callahan's study on a rainy night and seen something she couldn't make sense of and run. That woman was gone. What had replaced her was something that had been built, under pressure, without her permission, out of the materials the last 4 months had provided. She wasn't sure yet what to call it. From somewhere above them in the building, they heard the emergency security system. The emergency lockdown sound was not an alarm exactly. It was deeper than that, a low resonant tone that moved through the building's walls rather than across them, the kind of sound designed to be felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears. It ran for 3 seconds and stopped. In the silence that followed, they could hear the magnetic locks on the vault room's outer door engaging with a sound like a car door closing, solid and final. Thomas stirred against Mara's chest. Didn't wake. She pressed her hand to his back. Adrian ended the call with Marcus and stood with the phone in his hand, listening to the building settle into its locked state. His face was controlled, but his breathing wasn't. She could see it, the slight elevation, the chest moving a half-beat faster than he would have chosen. How long until your lawyer gets here? She said. 40 minutes minimum, probably 50. And Reyes is outside with 4 people. Was outside. In a lockdown. Anyone inside the building when it triggered stays inside. He looked at her. If he had someone in the bank, they're still in here. She felt it move through her. He planned for this. He planned for a version of this. He didn't plan for Marcus's call getting to the right person fast enough to trigger the lockdown before he got inside. Adrian's jaw tightened. But if he has a person in here, they know where we are. The vault staff. Possibly. Or someone posed as a customer, or... He stopped. From the other side of the vault room door came a sound. Not the magnetic lock. Something else. A keypad sequence, the mechanical click of a secondary override. Mara had the hard drive out of her bag and in her hand before the thought finished forming. She looked at Adrian. He was already moving, to the side of the door, back flat against the vault shelving, not behind it but beside it, in the angular space the door's swing would cover if it opened fast. It opened fast. The man who came through was not bank staff. He was wearing a bank employee lanyard, but he moved like someone who had worn it for 30 minutes, not 30 years. Wrong angle on the shoulders, wrong distribution of attention. He was looking for someone standing in the middle of the room. He found Adrian's fist connecting with the side of his jaw before he finished looking. The man went down hard. Not out. He was big, and he absorbed it, but down. And Adrian was on him before he came back up, one knee on his back, one hand controlling his right arm at an angle that made the arm's future uncertain. "How many in the building?" Adrian said. The man said nothing. Adrian adjusted the angle of the arm. The man made a sound that wasn't a word. "How many?" "Two," the man said. Rough. "One more down here, one upstairs managing the staff." "Managing meaning?" "Keeping them in place. Nobody gets hurt if—" "Where's Reyes?" A pause. The pause of someone calculating. Adrian adjusted again. The calculation ended. "Outside. He couldn't get in before the lock triggered. He's waiting for the second override cycle, 30 minutes. The system resets for a fire marshal override, and the doors release for 60 seconds. Adrian looked at Mara. She understood it immediately. 30 minutes of hard lock, then a 60-second window when everything opened. If Reyes knew the bank's security system well enough to know that detail, he'd been planning this specific location for longer than the last 12 hours. "He scouted this bank," she said, "before we knew about the box." Adrian's eyes came back to her, and she watched him run the implication. "He's known about the box. He just didn't know the key." The man on the floor said, "You're not getting out of here." "Quiet," Adrian said. He looked around the vault room. Small, fluorescent, one door. Shelving units along 3 walls, deep enough to hold their boxes. A ventilation grill near the ceiling, too small for a person. A security camera in the corner whose red light was currently dark. The lockdown had cut the internal camera feed, which meant whoever was upstairs managing the staff was doing it blind to this room. "Zip ties," Adrian said to Mara. "I don't carry zip ties." Back of his belt, right side. She went to the man on the floor and found them. 2 plastic restraints, the kind sold in hardware stores, light but functional. She handed them to Adrian without being asked. He had the man secured in 40 seconds, hands behind, ankles together, positioned against the shelving with the particular efficiency of someone who had done this before and didn't need to think about the steps. Then he stood up and looked at Mara. "The second person down here," she said. "Between us and the stairwell." He wiped his right hand on his coat. The back of it was bleeding again. The same hand from the print shop, the skin split further now. He didn't look at it. "One set of stairs, one elevator that's locked out in a security event. We go up. We go through whoever's in the corridor. Or we wait for your lawyer. If Reyes has the fire marshal override code, and if he's known about this bank long enough to know the 60-second window, he has the code. Then in 28 minutes that door opens and we're in a vault room with 1 exit and no advantage." He looked at her steadily. "We're better upstairs." She looked at Thomas. He was awake now, quiet, looking at the fluorescent light above with the focused attention he gave to all light sources. His fist was closed around a fold of her shirt. "I'm not running with him," she said. "Not through a confrontation. I know, there's a conference room on the ground floor, east side. No external windows, single door, internal to the building. Get there and lock it. I'll come to you. And if you don't, call Marcus. He has a number that goes to a federal contact. Not local, federal. Give him the drive." He said it without looking away from her. "Don't give it to anyone else." She held his gaze for a moment. There was nothing left in either of them for anything other than the immediate problem, and they both knew it, and there was something clarifying about that. The way crisis strips the non-essential until what's left is the actual thing, undecorated. "Don't get killed," she said. "Not today," he said. She almost believed him. The second man was in the corridor at the base of the stairs, which she knew because Adrian held her back at the vault room door for 30 seconds, listening, before he moved. She didn't see what happened in the corridor. She heard it, brief and physical and conclusive. When he came back to the doorway, his lip was split and he was holding his ribs with one arm in a way that suggested something had connected there. "Go," he said. "East corridor, past the teller windows, door at the end." She went. The bank's ground floor and lockdown was a specific kind of wrong. The lighting had shifted to emergency registers, the teller stations unmanned, the marble floor stretching out with the abandoned quality of a space meant for people that currently had none. She moved through it quickly, Thomas in the carrier, go bag on her shoulder, the hard drive in her coat pocket where she could feel it against her ribs. She passed the teller windows. She found the corridor. She found the conference room door and tried it. And it was unlocked, and she went in and locked it behind her. The room had a long table and 8 chairs and a whiteboard with old marker writing on it that hadn't been erased. She sat at the far end of the table with her back to the wall, facing the door, Thomas in her lap now, out of the carrier. He looked up at her face. She looked back at him. She counted her breathing. She listened to the building. For 11 minutes, nothing. Then footsteps in the corridor. She stood up, Thomas against her chest, one hand going to her go bag where she kept the prepaid phone. Knock. It's me. Adrian's voice. Tight. She unlocked the door. He came in and locked it behind him and leaned against it for a second with his eyes closed. His lip had stopped bleeding. The ribs were clearly bothering him. The way he was carrying himself had shifted, a slight compensation in his posture she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't spent 3 years watching how he moved. The person upstairs, she said. Secured. He opened his eyes. We have 11 minutes before the fire marshal window. Does Reyes know we're in here? He knows we're in the building. He doesn't know this room. He pushed off the door and came to the table. He sat down in the chair nearest her, and for a moment he just sat, elbows on the table, hands loose in front of him, and she could see it. The cost of the last 8 hours, the last 4 months, the last 2 years, sitting on him with a weight that didn't leave room for posture. Thomas reached out from his position against Mara's chest and grabbed at the air in Adrian's direction, the small, unfocused reaching of a baby toward warmth. Adrian looked at it. He looked at his own hands. He looked at his son with an expression that Mara could not name, but that went through her anyway. The way certain things do when you've loved someone long enough to know the difference between what they show and what they feel. Slowly, he extended one finger. Thomas grabbed it. They sat like that for a moment, the 3 of them in a locked conference room in a bank in lockdown, the building's emergency lighting making everything amber and provisional, the hard drive in her pocket, the list of names in her hand, the clock running. I need to tell you something, Adrian said. He wasn't looking at Thomas anymore. He was looking at Mara. After, she said. No, now, while I still... He stopped, recalibrated. The authorization code on Lorenzo Romano's order. I need you to understand what that means and what it doesn't mean. Adrian, I ran an organization that made decisions I didn't always execute personally. I gave authority to people I trusted, and I trusted them with specific parameters, and sometimes what happened inside those parameters was not what I would have sanctioned if I'd been asked to sanction each step individually. His voice was flat, not defensive. The voice of someone reading a charge sheet with the intention of being accurate rather than exculpated. That doesn't make me innocent of the outcome, I know that. But Reyes used my code on an order I didn't originate, and the reason he could do that is because I built a structure where he had access to my authentication, and I built that structure because I trusted him. And trusting him was a mistake I made 15 years ago and paid for over the last 2 years without knowing I was paying. She listened. She didn't move. Lorenzo Romano is dead because Reyes used my name to issue an order that Reyes wanted issued for his own reasons. He was already working for Vanek by then, and Lorenzo Romano was a logistical connection that Vanek needed to sever to consolidate the corridor. He looked at her. Celeste spent 2 years believing her father died on my order. She came to me anyway. She gave me what I needed anyway, and she died before I could tell her she was wrong about the most important thing. The room was quiet for a moment. You don't know for certain it was Reyes, Mara said. On the order. The routing documentation on the hard drive will show it. If the authorization was processed through the same decommissioned structure, then it was Reyes operating through your identity, not you. She looked at him. That's what the drive proves. Among other things. Then we need to get it out of this building. His phone, the clean one, buzzed on the table. He looked at it. Lawyer is 5 minutes out. She's in contact with the federal liaison Marcus connected her to. He paused. and Reyes is at the fire marshal access panel on the north side of the building. 7 minutes until the window. What does he do when he gets inside? Mara said. He comes for the drive. Does he come himself? Reyes doesn't send people for things he needs done precisely. Adrian looked at the door. He'll come himself. Then we use that. He looked at her. You said the drive proves Reyes used your authorization. You said the routing documentation, the financial records, the list of names, all of it is enough to bury the entire network. She held his eyes. What would happen if Reyes walked into a room where a federal lawyer and a federal liaison were already in possession of the drive? Adrian was quiet for a moment. He's been building a controlled demolition for 2 years, she continued. He's been positioning himself to walk away from your organization with Vanek's money and your infrastructure in pieces. His entire exit depends on the drive not existing or not being credible. If he walks into a room where it's already in official hands, his exit closes, Adrian said, and his only remaining move is a deal, which means he needs to offer something worth dealing. The only thing he has worth dealing is Vanek. She watched Adrian's face. Vanek's operational infrastructure, his network, his financial channels. The whole architecture Celeste spent 2 years mapping from the inside. She paused. If Reyes understands that walking into this bank right now means choosing between federal prosecution and giving up Vanek, he'll choose Vanek, Adrian said, quietly, with the certainty of someone who knows exactly how a particular kind of man makes decisions under pressure. He'll give up Vanek because Vanek is not a loyalty. Vanek is a transaction. Reyes is always looking at the next position. Then we need your lawyer in this building before that window opens, Mara said. Adrian picked up the phone, made the call. His lawyer, a woman named Price, who Mara had met twice and found completely impenetrable in the best possible way, was apparently already at the building's north entrance, which was currently locked. Adrian gave her the secondary access code, the one the lockdown hadn't touched, the one he'd gotten from the bank manager before the lockdown triggered. She heard Price's voice on the other end, calm and precisely worded, confirming. 4 minutes to the window. They moved. Back down the corridor, through the ground floor, to the main lobby where the bank manager, a small, precise man named Okafor, who had been running internal protocols since the lockdown triggered, and who looked at Adrian Callahan with the expression of a man deeply regretting a Tuesday, let Price in through the secured north door. Price was 50, silver-haired, a leather bag on her shoulder that Mara understood contained the legal mechanism to transfer the hard drive into protected custody. She looked at Mara. She looked at Thomas. She said, in her completely impenetrable way, "Good morning," and then turned to Adrian and said, "Where's the drive?" Mara took it out of her pocket and handed it to Price directly. Price's assistant, who had come in behind her, a young man with a government-adjacent ID badge, produced a chain of custody form. Mara signed it. Price signed it. The assistant countersigned. The drive went into a sealed evidence bag, 90 seconds to the window. They stood in the lobby, all of them looking at the main doors. The deep tone of the lockdown system sounded. Shorter this time, a single pulse, and the magnetic locks on the main doors released with that same solid sound in reverse. The doors opened. Daniel Reyes walked in. He was not what Mara had expected. She'd built a version of him in her mind over the last 12 hours. And the version she'd built had the quality of a threat, which was correct, but she'd imagined threat wearing something more visible. He was a mid-40s man in a well-cut jacket, gray at the temples, with a face that conveyed absolutely nothing. 15 years of Adrian's security infrastructure. 15 years of building the machine that ran the machine, invisible by design. He had 2 people behind him. He stopped when he saw the lobby. He looked at Price, at the assistant with the sealed bag, at Mara, at Adrian. His face stayed where it was. Nothing moved in it, but something changed behind his eyes in the fraction of a second before he composed himself, and Mara caught it. And it was not guilt, and it was not fear exactly. It was the expression of a man running calculations at speed and arriving at a result he hadn't wanted to arrive at. "Daniel," Adrian said. Reyes said nothing. "The drive is in federal custody," Adrian said. "The routing records, the Romano documentation, and the payment list, all of it." He said it without emphasis, without heat. Just delivered it the way you deliver information that doesn't need decoration. Reyes looked at the sealed bag in the assistant's hand. He looked at Price. He looked at her ID and at the assistant's and at the forms visible in the open edge of Price's leather bag. His two people behind him were doing the math separately and arriving at it slower. "There's a version of this," Adrian said, "where you walk out of here today." Reyes's eyes came back to him. "A federal cooperation agreement," Price said, stepping forward with the total unhurried authority of someone whose entire life is paperwork, and who finds paperwork completely sufficient for any occasion. "In exchange for full disclosure regarding the operational structure of the Vanek organization, its financial infrastructure, key personnel, and active operations in this region." She held out a document, not extended toward Reyes, just held, visible. "This was prepared this morning. It's been reviewed by the federal liaison. It is a real offer." Reyes looked at the document. He looked at Adrian. "He doesn't walk away from his empire," Mara said. Everyone in the lobby looked at her, including Reyes. She held his gaze. "He gives it up. All of it. In exchange for what you know about Vanek, he gives up everything he built and accepts the terms." She paused. "But you were going to take it from him anyway. You were going to take it and burn it and hand the pieces to Vanek. You've been doing it for 2 years. Something moved in Reyes' face, a fine, controlled compression, like a fist tightening inside a glove. "Celeste Romano," Mara said. "You killed her." He looked at her for a long moment. His two people behind him were very still. "She was going to hand everything she had to Adrian," Reyes said. His voice was the same as his face, controlled, precise, giving only what it chose to give. The whole architecture, 2 years of documentation, it would have ended the operation. He said it without heat, as if he were describing a business decision, which was exactly what it had been to him. "It ended the operation anyway," Mara said. "She got it to us. Not all of it." Something shifted in his face then, the first thing she'd seen move there without his choosing to move it. "She didn't tell you where the secondary archive is." The lobby went very quiet. Adrian's eyes moved to Reyes with the specific quality of absolute attention. "There's a secondary archive." "Everything she gave you is the summary document," Reyes said. He was looking at Adrian now, not Mara. And the thing in his face was not a card being played. It was something else. Something that looked almost like the satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a very long time to be in a room where he was the only one who knew something critical. The primary archive is larger, more detailed. Vanek's entire financial network, accounts, shell structures, the money pipeline from 6 countries. Celeste documented it over 2 years and she split it. What you have is enough to make a case. What's in the primary archive is enough to dismantle the entire organization. He paused. Permanently. "Where is it?" Adrian said. Reyes looked at the cooperation agreement in Price's hand. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Mara. "She told you something," he said. "It wasn't a question. Before she died. She called someone. I assumed it was Adrian, but you weren't together then." He looked at Mara. "She called you." Mara held his gaze and did not answer, and the quality of her not answering told him something because she watched it land. "She trusted a journalist," he said, almost quiet enough to be to himself. "Of course she did." He looked at the cooperation agreement one more time. He looked at the sealed bag with the hard drive. He looked at Adrian Callahan standing in his own bank lobby, having lost his empire in the last 8 hours, and standing there anyway with the quality of a man who has decided that the thing on the other side of the loss is worth the cost. He took the document from Price's extended hand. He held it. Mara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out. A message from a number she didn't fully recognize, a number she'd seen only once before. Written on a piece of paper Celeste Romano had included in the envelope addressed to Adrian, a number listed with only the notation, "If something happens before I can get this to him." The message was 4 words. "Storage unit. Yael has key." Mara looked at the message. She looked up at Daniel Reyes standing in the lobby with the cooperation agreement in his hand, a man who was about to give up the architecture of his entire career in exchange for a sentence reduction, believing the primary archive was a card he still controlled. She turned to Adrian. She showed him the phone. She watched it move through him. The understanding of what Celeste Romano had done. Not just the safety deposit box. Not just the summary document. She'd split the archive because she'd known from the beginning that someone might get to one piece before she could complete the delivery. She'd built redundancy into her own death. She'd trusted her estranged sister with a key she didn't explain. She'd trusted Mara Callahan, a journalist she'd never met, the wife of the man she'd once believed killed her father, with the location. She'd trusted the right people. Adrian looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the document in his hand with the face of a man who does not know yet that the last card he thought he was holding has already been played. "Sign it," Adrian said, "and then we're going to tell you something." Reyes looked up. "About the primary archive," Adrian said, "and about what it means that a woman you killed trusted a stranger more than she trusted you." The lobby held that sentence for a moment. Reyes's two people behind him shifted. Price's assistant was very still with the sealed bag. Thomas, awake and looking around the marble lobby with the democratic fascination of infancy, made a small sound that could have been anything. Reyes looked at Adrian Callahan for a long time. He looked at him the way you look at something you've been trying to destroy for 2 years and failed to destroy, not because it was stronger than you thought, but because it was different than you thought. Not the empire you were dismantling, but the man inside it who had survived the dismantling. He put the document on the lobby's front counter. He picked up the pen Price produced without being asked. He signed his name. Mara watched him do it, and she felt the thing that had been building since the rainy night she walked into Adrian's study. The weight of everything she hadn't understood, and everything she'd lost, and everything she'd had to become. She felt it shift, not lift, but change position, settle differently against the structure of what came next. Adrian looked at her across the lobby. She looked back at him. Thomas grabbed a fistful of her collar and held on with the absolute, uncomplicated certainty of a child who does not know the word for. The storage facility was on the eastern edge of the city, the kind of place that exists in the margins of industrial zones. Corrugated metal units in rows, fluorescent lighting that buzzed at a frequency designed to discourage lingering. A front office with a board attendant who didn't look up when they came in. Yael Romano was already there when they arrived. She was standing at the unit's roll door with a key in her hand and the expression of someone who has spent the last 3 hours sitting alone with news that doesn't get better the longer you sit with it. She'd gotten the call from Mara an hour ago. She'd asked one question: "Is this the last thing my sister needed someone to do?" Mara had said yes. Yael had said, "Give me the address." She didn't say anything when they walked up. She looked at Adrian for a moment, long enough to be deliberate. And then she looked away and put the key in the lock and rolled the door up. The unit was small and climate-controlled, which meant Celeste had paid extra for it, which meant whatever was inside mattered enough to protect. A single shelf unit against the back wall. On the shelf, a fireproof document box, locked, and beside it a sealed hard drive case with a combination lock, the combination written on a piece of tape on Yael's keyring in handwriting that Yael was looking at like it was the last word her sister ever said to her, which functionally it was. Yael read the combination aloud. She said it once, flat, and then stepped back and let Adrian and Price work. The primary archive was everything Celeste had promised and more. Price worked through it, standing at the shelf with the systematic focus of someone who could assess the legal value of a document in the time it took most people to read the title. Her assistant photographed everything in sequence. The financial architecture of Vonek's organization spread out across 22 physical files and 2 digital drives. Account structures, shell company registrations across 6 jurisdictions, personnel rosters with evidence logs, transaction records going back 4 years. Celeste Romano had built a case that a federal prosecutor would have spent 2 years assembling, and she had built it alone, in secret, while working inside the organization she was documenting, while knowing that the man she was building it against had enough reach to kill her and enough motive to do it cleanly. Price looked up from the shelf at one point and said, to no one specific, she was extraordinary. She said it the way lawyers say things that matter, without adornment, without performance. Just the accurate word. Yael, standing at the unit's entrance with her arms crossed and her eyes somewhere else, heard it. She didn't respond. But something shifted in her posture, a degree or two, the way a person shifts when they've been handed something they needed and weren't expecting. Adrian stood back from the shelf. He'd stepped back when Price took over, and he'd stayed back, and Mara had noticed it. The deliberate act of not controlling a situation he could no longer usefully control. She'd noticed it and filed it. When Price had completed her initial assessment and her assistant had sealed the materials for transport, Price turned to Adrian and said, "This is enough to dismantle Vanek's entire operation in this region and connect the financial infrastructure to active federal investigations in 3 states. It will be used." She paused. "I want to be precise with you about what that means. The cooperation agreement with Reyes and the materials in these archives will generate federal proceedings that will touch everything and everyone connected to the Vanek network." She held his gaze with the flat directness that was her default mode. "Including the Callahan organization's historical involvement in Vanek's distribution infrastructure." "I know," Adrian said. "The federal liaison has indicated a limited cooperation framework is possible, contingent on full disclosure and a verified exit from all current operations. Not a clean slate, not immunity, a framework." She paused again. "I need to know if that's what you want." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of someone who has already made a decision and is taking the last second before stating it to make sure they're certain. "That's what I want," he said. Price nodded once, the way she acknowledged all information, efficiently and without editorial, and turned back to her materials. Mara stood at the unit's entrance beside Yael. Thomas was asleep in the carrier again, his weight the constant physical fact of the last 12 hours. The thing that had kept her tethered to the present tense, when everything else was trying to pull her into the past or the future. "She never stopped watching out for people," Yael said. She said it quietly, not to Mara exactly, more at the middle distance, even when she was in something terrible. Even then, Mara didn't say anything. She let the sentence exist. "We had a fight," Yael said, 7 years ago. About our father. About what she was getting into. I said things, accurate things. I still think they were accurate, but I said them in the way you say things when you're 27 and you think being right is the same as being useful." She looked at her hands. "It wasn't." "She knew you loved her," Mara said. "It wasn't comfort exactly. It was just the thing she believed to be true based on the letter Celeste had written and the key she'd left and the voice message Yael had described receiving 2 weeks before Celeste died, the one she hadn't answered." Yael looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because she gave you 2 keys," Mara said. "One to a box she needed someone to guard, and one to a unit she needed someone to open. She could have sent both to a lawyer. She could have sent both anonymously. She sent them to you." She paused. "She wanted you to be part of how it ended." Yael looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at the middle distance and was quiet, and Mara let her be quiet. Tick. The federal liaison arrived at 11 in the morning, 2 vehicles and 4 people, with the specific organized efficiency of an institutional process that has been waiting for the right materials to arrive. Price handled the transfer. Mara signed what needed signing. Adrian spoke with the liaison privately for 20 minutes in the facility's front office while Mara sat in the car with Thomas and the specific exhaustion of a body that has been running on emergency chemistry for too long and is beginning to register the debt. She looked at her son. He was awake and looking at his own hands with the focused wonderment of a child who has just noticed that his hands are his hands and that they do things when he thinks about them doing things. She watched him open and close his fingers. She thought about all the mornings in the anonymous apartment 3 states away. The cash grocery runs, the freelance editing work in the small hours, the careful construction of a life that fit inside its own edges. And she thought about the woman she'd been building herself into in that apartment, the one who had cut the tether and was learning to live without the weight of Adrian Callahan's world on her. She thought about whether she missed that woman. She didn't have an answer yet. She thought that was probably right. Adrian came out of the front office. He came to the car and got in the passenger seat and sat there for a moment without saying anything. He looked the way people look when they've been carrying something for so long that putting it down doesn't feel like relief yet. It just feels like absence. "It's done," she said. "The framework is in place. Price will manage the disclosure process. It'll take months. The full proceedings will take longer than that." He looked forward. "But Reyes is in federal custody. The Vanek network's financial infrastructure is frozen, and the organization... He stopped. What's left of it will wind down under federal oversight, which means the people who worked for it have a path, if they cooperate, and the infrastructure itself stops existing. He said it without audible grief, but she heard it anyway, in the space around the words. "How does that feel?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Like waking up in a room I've been trying to leave for longer than I admitted." She looked at him. He was looking at Thomas. "He has your mouth," he said. "I noticed that just now." She looked at Thomas. "He has your eyes." "I know." He said it very quietly. She watched a muscle move in his jaw. She watched him hold himself very still with the same discipline he'd been applying to himself since she'd known him. The practiced containment of a man who had learned early that showing the full extent of what he felt was a liability, and who had spent years unable to fully unlearn that lesson even when it cost him things he could not afford to lose. "You can hold him," she said. He looked at her. "If you want to," she said. He did want to. She could see it in the specific quality of his stillness, the way a person goes still when they want something very much, and are not certain they're allowed to reach for it. She unstrapped Thomas from the carrier and held him out. Adrian took his son with both hands, carefully, with the absolute attention of a man handling the most important thing he has ever been handed. Thomas looked up at him. Did the unfocused assessment that babies do, the systematic taking in of a new face, the slow determination of whether this is a known quantity or not. Then something in his expression resolved, the way infant expressions resolve, into something that wasn't a smile exactly, but had the quality of one, the muscular predecessor to it. Adrian looked at his son's face for a long time without speaking. Mara looked out the window. She gave them the moment without watching it. It was 3 in the afternoon when they drove to Yael Romano's apartment. Not together. Adrian's driver took him to a location where his lawyer was managing the first phase of the disclosure process, and Mara took a cab to Yael's. Thomas in the carrier, go bag finally lighter now that the hard drive was gone and the list of names was in federal hands. Yael opened the door before she knocked. She'd been home for 2 hours. She'd made more coffee. She had the look of a woman who had been sitting with something enormous and had decided that she was going to sit with it all the way through rather than look away from it. Mara sat at her kitchen table. She put Thomas in her lap. She said, "I want to tell you about your sister, what she did and why I think she did it. If you want to hear it." Yael sat across from her. "Tell me." So Mara told her. Not the legal version, Price had that. The human version. Celeste at the meeting with Adrian, the 3 weeks she'd spent trying to give him enough to act on without revealing the full archive until she was certain he was the right person to hand it to. The phone call the night before she died, the information she'd passed, the letter she'd written. The way she had understood, Mara believed, that she was building something that would outlast her. That the point was not for Celeste Romano to survive the process, but for the thing she'd built to survive it. She'd made herself into an instrument, and she'd aimed herself, and she'd gone. Yael listened. She held her coffee mug with both hands, and she listened without interrupting, and when Mara finished, she was quiet for a while. "She was always like that," Yael said finally. "Even when we were kids. She'd decide something mattered, and that was it. Nothing in between." She looked at her coffee. "I used to think it was recklessness. I think now it was just... she didn't have a halfway setting." "Neither do you," Mara said. "You came to a storage facility at 7 in the morning because a stranger called you and said your sister needed it." Yael looked at her. A faint compression at the corners of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile but had something in it. "I came because Celeste needed it," she said. "Not the stranger." "Fair," Mara said. Thomas grabbed at the table edge and Mara caught his hand and held it, and he redirected his grip to her finger, which he found satisfactory. "What happens now?" Yael said. "For you." Mara looked at her son's hand around her finger. "I don't know yet," she said. "I know what doesn't happen. I'm not going back to what I was before. Either version." She paused. "The anonymous apartment or the Callahan estate? Is there something in between?" "I'm going to try to find out." Yael looked at her steadily. "And him?" Mara didn't ask who she meant. "He's giving up everything," she said. Not because I asked him to, because he decided the thing on the other side of it was worth more than the thing he was holding. She paused. I don't know what that makes him. I don't know if it makes him the person I wanted him to be 3 years ago, or just the person he is now. She looked at Yael. I'm not sure those are different things. They might not be, Yael said. They sat for a while in the kitchen, with the coffee going cold, and Thomas dozing against Mara's chest, the afternoon light moving across the floor, the city outside going about its business in the completely indifferent way that cities go about their business, while the people inside them have their reckonings. She met Adrian that evening at a diner 4 blocks from the Federal Processing Center. His choice. She'd expected somewhere more controlled, more his register, and he'd set a diner with the flatness of someone who no longer has a register to protect. The diner was the kind that had been in the same location for 30 years. The same booths, the same menu laminated over itself twice, the same quality of light that made everything look like a memory even while you were in it. They sat across from each other in a corner booth. Thomas was in the carrier between the table's edge and Mara's chest, asleep with the totality that only the very young can manage. A waitress brought coffee without being asked. Mara wrapped her hands around the mug. Adrian sat with his hands flat on the table, the split on his right hand dressed now with a bandage that looked like it had been applied by someone who cared about doing it correctly. Marcus, she said. He's been fully cleared. His name will be part of the federal disclosure, but as a witness and victim of the frame, not a participant. He's cooperating. Adrian looked at his coffee. He called me this afternoon. He said he wanted me to know he understood why I had to consider him as a suspect, and that he didn't hold it against me. He paused. He also said he was too old for this, and was retiring to his sister's place in New Mexico, and that I should not contact him for any reason for at least 5 years. Mara felt something that was almost a laugh move through her. That sounds like the right call. It is. He looked at her. The federal framework requires me to cooperate fully with the disclosure process, which means the next 12 to 18 months are constrained. Price is managing it. There's a settlement structure for the financial obligations, a timeline for the organizational wind-down, a monitoring arrangement. He said it all with the same flat precision, giving her the information she needed without packaging it in a way that asked her to react to it a particular way. At the end of that process, I'm a private citizen with a significantly reduced financial position and a federal cooperation agreement on my record, which is not nothing, but it's also not a mafia boss, she said. No, he said. It's not that. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Across the booth, over the untouched coffee and the laminated menu and the noise of the diner around them. A couple arguing quietly in the next booth, a man on his phone at the counter, a kid in a booth by the window drawing on a napkin with a pen his mother kept trying to take away. I wrote you a letter, she said. When I left, I told you I was something colder and more final than angry. I remember. I want to tell you what that actually was, she said. Not anger, not even hurt exactly. It was the specific feeling of realizing that you'd let me build something inside your world without making sure I fully understood what the world was. And I'd let myself not understand it, because understanding it meant deciding what to do about it, and I didn't want to decide. She looked at her coffee. That's on both of us. I know that. Yes, he said. He didn't distribute blame differently. He just agreed. I don't forgive you because the night in the study turned out to be something other than what I thought, she said. I want to be precise about that, because if I told myself that's the reason, I'd be doing the same thing I did before, making the version of the story I could live with rather than the one that's actually true. He held her gaze, didn't flinch, didn't fill the silence. The truth is that you built something dangerous and you asked me to live inside it without the full information required to choose, she said. And the truth is also that when it cost you everything, when it was the Empire or us, you chose us. Not because you had to, because you decided to. She paused. Those two truths are both true at the same time. I'm not going to resolve them into one simpler thing just because one simpler thing would be easier to carry. I know, he said. I'm not coming back to what we were, she said. That's not the offer. He nodded once, still holding her gaze. But Thomas is going to know his father, she said. Not the legend, not the boss. The man who signed a cooperation agreement in a bank lobby and drove to a storage facility and sat in a diner and drank bad coffee. She looked at him. If you can be that man. I don't know yet if I can, he said. It was the most honest thing she'd ever heard him say. I know who I've been for 15 years. I know the muscle memory of it. I know that it's going to take longer than 18 months to find out what's underneath it. He looked at Thomas, asleep between them. But I want to try, specifically, not as a concept. He looked back at her. I want to take him to a park on a Tuesday afternoon. I want to know what he sounds like when he laughs. I want to be in the same room with him long enough that he stops being fascinated by my face because he's seen it so many times it's just my face. He stopped. That's the most I can tell you honestly about what I want. She looked at him for a long time. That's enough, she said. For now. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside the diner window, the city was doing its evening shift. The quality of the light changing, the foot traffic changing, the day folding into something else. A man walked by walking a dog that was walking him. Two women stood at the corner talking with the animated thoroughness of people who have a lot to cover and have accepted that they are going to stand at the corner until they've covered it. Thomas woke up. He woke with a small sound, and then his eyes opened and he looked around the diner with the newly arrived attention of an infant processing a new location, running his gaze along the ceiling, the booth, the window, and then settling, with the particular certainty of a creature who has not yet learned to be uncertain, on his father's face. Adrian went still. Thomas looked at him. Adrian extended his hand across the table, palm up, the way you offer something without demanding it be taken. Thomas looked at the hand. He looked at it with the deliberate assessment he gave everything. Then he reached out and got both hands on Adrian's index finger and held on with the grip that always surprised adults encountering it for the first time. The grip that was all intention and no reservation. Adrian looked at his son holding his finger. He looked at him for a long time. Mara watched him. She watched the thing that moved through his face. Slow, thorough, reaching into the places that the controlled surface didn't cover. She watched 15 years of construction and management and the constant maintenance of a self that could not afford to be fully visible. She watched all of it meet something it had no protocol for, something small and complete and entirely without agenda, and she watched it, very slowly, come apart. He didn't cry. She hadn't expected him to. But the thing that replaced the controlled surface was not the emptiness that sometimes follows collapse. It was something older and simpler than that, something that had been there before the organization and the empire and the man that everyone in 3 states was afraid of. She didn't know what to call it. She thought that maybe it didn't need a name. It was just his face, without anything over it. She looked away. She looked out the window at the street, at the city, at the ordinary ongoing fact of people living their lives in proximity to each other, sustaining each other and damaging each other, and sometimes, occasionally, choosing each other again after everything. The waitress came and refilled their coffee without being asked. Mara wrapped both hands around the mug and felt the warmth of it. Chug. 3 months later, she was back in a city. Not the anonymous one, not the estate. A third city, one she chose herself with the full information available to her. A ground-floor apartment with a small yard where Thomas could eventually use his legs for their intended purpose. A freelance arrangement with an investigative outlet that knew her real name and didn't need her to be anyone else. She wrote the Celeste Romano story. It took 6 weeks. Price cleared the materials that could be used. The federal proceedings were ongoing, and she was careful about what she published and when, threading the needle between public interest and the integrity of the legal process with the precision she'd spent a career developing. The story ran in 3 parts over 3 weeks. It named the names that could be named. It documented the network Celeste had spent 2 years mapping and the mechanism by which she'd gotten the information out. It credited her fully and accurately, and at length. The story was read by a lot of people. Yael Romano called Mara the morning the first part published. She said she'd read it twice. She said it was true. She said thank you in the specific way of someone who knows that the word is insufficient and is going to say it anyway because the alternative is silence, and silence between them was a thing they'd both decided not to perpetuate. Mara said you're welcome, and meant it. Adrian came on Thursday afternoons. That had been the arrangement for the first 6 weeks, and it had held, which she hadn't entirely expected, and which told her something she was still processing. He came and he stayed for 2 hours, and he sat on the floor of the living room and let Thomas conduct the systematic investigation of his presence that Thomas brought to everything. The study of his hands, his watch, his face, the collar of his jacket, all of it examined and evaluated and filed with the thoroughness of a creature who is building a world from scratch and cannot afford to skip steps. He didn't try to fill the 2 hours with anything more than what they were. He didn't petition for more. He showed up, and he was present. And he was learning, visibly and imperfectly, how to exist in a room with his son without managing the experience of it. She could see it costing him, the not managing. She could see him catch himself doing it and put it down and try again. She didn't help him with it. It wasn't her work to do. But she made coffee. She sat in the armchair across the living room and drank it, and sometimes they talked and sometimes they didn't. And Thomas moved between them with the absolute democratic impartiality of a child who has not yet learned to navigate between two people, and so simply exists in the space they share and expects them to arrange themselves around him, which they did. One Thursday he arrived, and Thomas was in the middle of a concentrated effort to stand, hands on the coffee table, legs working at the logistics of weight distribution. The specific, furious determination of a child who has identified a capability and is going to develop it regardless of how many times the floor re-enters the picture. Adrian sat down cross-legged on the other side of the table without being invited and without announcement, and held his hands out at the level of the table's edge, available without insisting, and Thomas grabbed them when the table stopped being sufficient and stood. He stood for 4 seconds. Then he sat down. He looked up at his father with the expression of someone who has just accomplished something and wants it acknowledged. "Yeah," Adrian said. "I saw." Thomas made a sound of satisfaction. Mara, from the armchair, looked at the two of them on the living room floor. This man she had loved and almost lost in ways that went further than leaving. This child who was the point of everything they'd done in the last year. This Thursday afternoon in an apartment she'd chosen herself in a city she was still learning. And she felt something she didn't try to name because it was still forming, still not finished, still doing the work of becoming whatever it was going to be. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she was watching. She drank it anyway. Outside, the afternoon was clear and unremarkable, the city going about its Thursday business, entirely unaware that anything in this apartment mattered at all. Which was exactly what she'd wanted when she'd chosen it. The invisibility of ordinary life, the cover that normal days provide, the fact that a child learning to stand and a man learning to stay, and a woman deciding what to forgive and what to simply carry forward could happen here without the weight of a legend attached to any of it. The Mafia boss everyone had feared was sitting on her living room floor, making the kind of face adults make when they're trying to get a baby to laugh. Undignified and unguarded and completely without the controlled surface that had defined him for 15 years. Thomas laughed. It was the full-body kind, the kind that takes over an infant completely, the kind that sounds like it surprises the person doing it as much as the person watching it. It rang through the apartment and out the window and into the unremarkable Thursday afternoon. Adrian's face, when she looked at it, was the face she'd seen in the bank lobby when Thomas had grabbed his finger and held on. The face without anything over it, just his face. She didn't look away from it this time. She let herself look at it until it was just a thing she'd seen, a thing she could hold, a thing that belonged to the real account of what had happened between them rather than the version she'd been managing in her own interior for the last year. She let it be what it was, complicated and costly and true. Thomas grabbed at the air between them, both arms up, the signal that had already become his signature request. Adrian picked him up. Mara watched her son settle against his father's chest with the completeness of a child who has made his assessment and reached his verdict, and she felt the last tightly held thing in her, the last piece of the careful armor she'd built in those months in the anonymous apartment, the last edge of the cold, settled purpose that had gotten her through the bank and the vault room and the storage facility and the federal forms. She felt it release, not dissolve, just release, like a fist unclenching. Not because the danger is gone, but because holding that hard for that long is its own damage. And she had decided she was done with damage she was doing to herself. She wasn't done with all of it. She knew that. There was still the ongoing legal process and the things Adrian had been and the things she'd let herself not look at, and the fact that somewhere in the record of her marriage there were decisions that didn't get clean because the people involved chose to move forward. None of that went away. But Thomas was laughing again at something Adrian was doing with his hands, some low-stakes magic trick of distraction that was not impressive and did not need to be. And the afternoon light was moving across the floor of the apartment she had chosen herself. And Mara Voss, not Callahan, not the cover name, the name she'd been born with and had come back to, sat in her own chair in her own life and drank her cold coffee. And stayed.